held back at you.
Well, we're live.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we don't go down the.
No, let's not.
The old
Rabbit
days.
hole.
Yeah. Welcome, Ms. Webb. Glad you're here. We are talking about pre-K, and Ms. Baker, I see you also have joined us. So Ms. Webb, your name was given to us as someone who could address a little bit of, some of the pre-K stuff that we're looking at, as it relates to the intersection with the independent childcare providers. You're at Winooski Valley. Well, let's see, you're the Act 166 coordinator for the Winooski Valley Superintendents Association.
Yes.
So maybe say a little bit about that, and then tell us what you're thinking. And then we have an Addison County regional coordinator. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is Winooski your district?
Well, so it's not actually Winooski School
Oh.
Districts, because
Oh.
that's the confusion. So my name is Rebecca Webb. I am the Act 166 coordinator for the Winooski Valley Superintendents Association. So we're just going to call it WVSA. It's a lot less confusing. They are 10 supervisory unions. So it's a very unified union: Central Vermont, Harwood, Lamoille North and Lamoille South, Montpelier, Roxbury, Orange Southwest, Orleans Southwest, Washington Central, and White River Valley. So a pretty good swath of the state. As noted in the written testimony, we have over 1,400 preschoolers between the ages of 3 and kindergarten that currently receive universal preschool.
And just so everyone knows, I should have said Act 166 is the universal pre-K program in the state. Yeah.
And Meg and I are really happy that we've both been invited to do this. We often co-do presentations and have similar but different roles. So my role is really this collaboration between these superintendents. And I really focus on quality improvement, professional development, accountability, coaching, and policy. My days are really spent responding around Act 166 universal preschool questions. I support the local school district contacts. So at each of those 10 supervisory unions, there's an individual person who's the local contact, right? There's somebody sitting in Montpelier High School who answers those questions. I support the superintendents in their kind of conversations. Anything that has to do with preschool, I'm usually in on that conversation. And then I'm lucky enough to be the person who partners with those pre-K people that you talked with yesterday with their roles in these districts. So I do all of the paperwork. You've been hearing about the pre-qualification kind of qualities in the law. It's my job to say the AOE has made you a pre-qualified program. Let's form a partnership between your private child care and our region. I represent the 10 superintendents in that conversation. We have community programs, including home programs, centers, and any school that money crosses over district lines falls under my hat. So as I prepared this testimony, I really drew on my experiences as a community-based teacher and director. That's where I started in this work almost 29 years ago. My role as a public preschool teacher and as an itinerant special educator. I have a master's degree in early childhood special ed and a second master's in educational leadership. I have an endorsement through AOE in early childhood special ed and a new endorsement in school principal. So we share this background as a context for my testimony and an indication of the knowledge that I have in this field. And as I'm listening to the questions, this committee has really, really great questions that are coming up. And I think that having talked to Meg and having looked at this testimony that I prepared, we can answer some of those questions that keep coming up. As we start, or as I start this testimony, I really want to make sure that there's a language clarification. When Ms. St. James talked yesterday about regions, right, and that the school district can limit where their boundaries are. When we talk about my region throughout this testimony, it's the group of 10 supervisory unions. It's not the public pre-K region in the law that she was talking about. So we really wanted to start off with a visual picture of what universal pre-K looks like for our 10 supervisory unions. We have 49 community partners, so people that play the roles that you heard from yesterday. We have a preschool in almost every elementary school building within the 10 supervisory unions. Again, like I said earlier, we currently serve 1,400 students that are living in this region between those two ages, what we consider as preschool. We partner with home and centers, and we have several students who attend preschool classrooms that are not in their home districts, but tuition to other districts. So we have some Roxbury students who transition and receive their universal preschool in Northfield, just as an example.
At a public place or
At the,
or an independent provider?
It's a mix, it's a
Okay,
mix, right? So the 49 community programs are private providers, but we also have a number of students who go to public pre-K within kind of the 10 supervisory union region, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
So since 2018, we've had a unified partnership agreement so that partnering programs, community programs who are within our, who want to partner with any of our 10 school districts only have to fill out the paperwork once. So they're essentially making the agreement with all 10 of the supervisory unions in one document. So you've heard from other experts in the field, including yesterday's testimony from some community partners, and I really am here to share about that superintendent's piece, our 10 superintendents. So many of our collaborative supervisory unions do not have the additional space and the staffing to offer full day programming at this time. We've depended on and we see our local community preschools as true partners in providing universal preschool to our region's youngest learners. Our superintendents agree that bringing 4-year-olds into our public school locations is a positive move. It eases the transition to kindergarten, builds earlier relationships with families, increases the ability to identify and serve children with special needs. But when we're discussing repealing, which is really what this proposed bill does, Act 166, universal preschool, we need to think both on an early childhood level and on direct impacts to the schools. Our physical spaces in our schools are not designed to accommodate the unique needs of our young students. Limited building space limits the creation of preschool classrooms. When classroom space is available, funding for this retrofitting that will need to be allocated to design classrooms which allow for students' basic needs. Things such as lower toilets, sinks, furniture, playground equipment will all need to be considered. New construction and retrofitting of classrooms is not a quick process and impacts local school budgets unless there's state level funding that's allocated to offset these costs. This current proposal does not include a mechanism for funding the startup costs. The piece that I think will answer many of your questions around NAEYC and the accreditation and the quality improvement is this next section. So currently, we are across our private programs and our in-house preschool programs. We are regulated by this dual oversight of the Agency of Ed and the Department of Children and Families. So while removing the current dual oversight within a school building is seen as a positive move, the inclusion of meeting the National Association of the Education of Young Children, so those NAEYC accreditation pieces, feels to our superintendents like this only moves the current 2 regulatory system to a different and new set of criteria. Principals currently need to ensure that the preschools in their elementary buildings comply with 2 sets of health and safety, staffing ratios and qualifications, curriculum and assessment standards. It's likely that the requirements of being NAEYC accredited will continue to offer this duality in operations. If the current childcare licensing regulations are removed, then adding the accreditation makes sense. However, the implementation of this new standard criteria will require substantial early ed knowledge and substantial administrative support. The developmental needs of young children pose unique differences to health, to safety, to curriculum, and that use of play as that vehicle for learning. I'm going to pause and just say that the NACE accreditation standards lay out those questions that you had yesterday around teacher qualifications. That's in those standards. And the definition of play-based learning that was just asked is also within those standards. And you have a link to those. I dropped it in. We also talk with my superintendents, we also talk about staffing. Increasing the number of school-based preschool classrooms increases the staffing needs. To meet NACE standards, teachers must hold endorsements in either early childhood ed or early childhood special ed. As you're aware from other conversations, finding licensed teachers at any level is difficult, and the opening of more preschool classrooms within school buildings will just increase the strain. Our collaborative region, like many others, has worked with the Agency of Ed to provisionally license both teachers in our public school locations. So teachers who are already in public schools are on provisional licenses, some of them, and some of our pre-K programs within the community also have lead teachers who are provisionally licensed. The provision of special education identification and service delivery models is not addressed in this bill beyond the option of bringing 3-year-olds with individualized education plans, those IEPs, into a classroom space curated for 4-year-olds. Placing a subset of 3-year-olds into a 4-year-old's classroom does not provide an education with chronological age peers, which is something that NACE, the current field, the rest of the research, and actually the Agency of Ed all promote.
Would you repeat that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the bill,
Yeah.
since we're moving 4s, we're moving 3-year-olds out. Our current
What do you
system,
mean we're moving 3 years?
we're moving 3-year-olds out of the public school building.
Right, okay.
This bill
Yeah,
proposes it.
yeah, okay, thank you.
3-year-olds who are identified with special needs
Yeah.
fall under all of those special ed regs, right?
Right.
Oftentimes, those children, there's a mix. Often children receive their IEP services within their community programs.
Okay.
Children with higher needs who are on IEPs often are served within their public school program based on resources, availability, lack of, right? What can we do for the dosage? If we propose to move 3-year-olds out of the public school building, which will inevitably happen because we won't have funding for them, and we have 4-year-olds and we design a program that's strictly around 4-year-olds, the proposed bill does recognize that there will be a need to bring some of those 3-year-olds who are on IEPs into the school program.
Yeah.
It does change the ADM functioning from the current piece to that. But the 3-year-olds with IEPs would be the only 3-year-olds within that space. And so personally, as a person with a background in early childhood special ed,
Okay.
moving children who most likely have significant delays into a classroom that's chronologically a year ahead of them does not provide an inclusive environment. Did that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and that's helpful. I missed some of it. Now I think I've got it, yes.
It does make total sense, but I just have to point out that yesterday we were given the exact opposite testimony, that 3-year-olds do actually benefit from being in a room with 4-year-olds.
That's why I'm
Yes.
asking. But I think the difference is you're talking about kids who have high needs in terms of, their sort of developmental stuff, and putting them in with 4s could make it really challenging for those 3-year-olds to feel good about themselves, feel their own self-confidence. That's my take.
Yes.
Because Senator Gulick is absolutely right. We heard that, you've got
Yes.
5 or 6 years old, 5-year-olds in a private program and not in pre-K, or 4-year-olds. Those 4-year-olds can help, the others sort of come along.
It's a yes and.
Okay.
And so I'll try and explain it, and people can ask for clarity if I didn't get there. What we know from national research, right, is that having a mixed age classroom, a 3 to 5 year old classroom, like discussed yesterday, right? Like Allison and Linda and Stacy presented, that is best practice. What this bill does is takes our current mixed age in many of our schools, not all of our schools. Some of our schools currently have a 3-year-old classroom and a 4-year-old classroom. But what this bill proposes to do for children who have IEPs, who are identified as special education, it proposes that one of the options would be to keep them in the school building. And we're essentially looking at kiddos who have special needs, who are already delayed by definition of their classification and services, and putting them in a classroom that, unlike what we currently have, which is 3s and 4s, it's mixed, is a 4-year-old's classroom. So 3s and 4s and 5s in this kindergarten together, best practice. We're now proposing to move 4s straight up, 3s out, and still keep a segment of the population that we really want to be included with their same age peers. Did that answer it?
It totally answers it. I would just respond that that's what licensed and highly qualified teachers do. They differentiate instruction. I mean, that's through the whole system is that happens.
And I think it's less about highly qualified teachers and more about the idea that children should be educated with children who are their own age, regardless of disability.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm happy to,
Sure.
and all of this being said, the current bill that the proposed bill is, the current law that the proposed bill is built off of, doesn't really touch special ed. So it's the intersection of all of our worlds. Yeah, and then the last piece that we just, as our superintendents really just wanted to get the messaging across is that this fiscal impact is huge. That there is a real difference between saying we're working as a supervisory union, as a school district, to really build classrooms slowly and be able to have it in a really thoughtful, managed way. And we're now mandated to have classrooms with capacity for all of our people. So I dropped in a bunch of resources for you, which you may or may not find useful. I think some of them are around the questions that you've had around the RAND report, some questions about the accreditation resources, some questions about the early learning standards. The piece around RAND that I want to clarify is that RAND was looking at how we're going to finance, right? The recommendations for financing. And so UPK's intersection into that was mentioned in there as one of the current funding pieces, but it's really the systems analysis study, which addresses the question that you had mentioned earlier to Ms. St. James.
Thank you.
Chair, can I take the liberty of 2 minutes of talking about my morning, which will directly relate to this?
Please.
So, and I'm happy to capture this in a written testimony too. Here's the example of the play-based and our current mixed delivery system. So we have several community programs, as I've already mentioned. I had the privilege of being in one that I've been in once a week. I'm doing some student teacher supervision. So community childcare that has some universal pre-K students within it. I was in a preschool classroom of 13 kids. I walked into the classroom and the teacher had prepared materials that addressed all of the domains that are in our early learning standards. And our early learning standards are really looking at the grade level expectations that is in the K-12 system. Called the children together. They worked through the transitions. There were definitely some social emotional moments going on, right? We're talking about a group of 3s and 4s. Called them together for a circle, introduced, they're studying the rainforest and they're studying the parts of plants. And so there was an activity around what's a part of a plant versus what's a plant's needs, right? So very dynamic, very grounded in developmentally appropriate and play-based practice. And then they were called together for a story. They were engaged. They asked, the children were engaged. The children asked awesome questions. And then they moved back into their small group activities. And then they were headed outside as I left. And that is one little tiny microcosm of how UPK currently works in Vermont. And how we can really do a mixed delivery system really well. And our kids are getting the early childhood education that they need.
Great. Yeah, I feel it.
When I get on my soapbox. You guys get sick of it. A lot of people in this room have already heard me say this, but I'm going to say it again, just because I feel it needs, and it's to your point earlier. We're here in the legislature to try to fix problems. Like that's kind of what we do. And a lot of times when we're trying to change systemic or structural systems, it's really uncomfortable for a lot of people and it's really hard. And I think for many folks, the first reaction is no, we can't change. And I appreciate getting data and I appreciate learning and I appreciate hearing stories. But I do think part of our job is to imagine a different future, to dream and think about possibilities that might not exist right now. So what I would love to hear, first of all, I just say if every single superintendent is like, there's no way this could ever work, that's to me our answer. However, if we get varying testimony, if we get a lot of different voices on this, then that begs a different question. And I guess what I want to start asking folks, because we have been hearing a lot of no, please don't change the system, is if you could, if one could change the system to reflect a little bit more what we're seeing in this bill, how would you do it? That's kind of, I would love to hear some of that. How could it work for you? You don't have to do it right now.
If I may also just add to that, as we're thinking about the world and what we would like, we also have to recognize it's a very unique state. Burlington is one thing, which we all love. Rural Vermont is another thing, which is also very different. And we want something I think that would work for everybody.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can start an answer. And then I did have a preview of Meg's testimony, and there are pieces of that answer that are within hers. So for my 10 superintendents, and I want to be really clear, like we're talking about 10, not the entire superintendent pieces out there. They are not objecting to the movement of Forge into the classrooms. We all understand in this region that is a positive move. The feeling from my superintendents is we don't have space. We're talking in the current proposal, right? I heard the change in tone and pieces throughout the earlier testimony. We're talking about a July 1 implementation date in the current proposal. And that's the piece that doesn't work right now in terms of a general feeling, right? We can't build classrooms. We can't create teachers overnight, even a provisionally licensed system that lets us do that. We can't add. Lamoille South has 40 classroom spaces right now. They run 2 preschool programs, one in Morrisville, one in Stowe. They have 40 spaces for preschoolers. There are 120 preschoolers who attend community programs. I don't have the breakdown offhand. I can certainly provide it of how many are 3s and how many are 4s currently. But even if only 50 of those, right, are kiddos who are currently in the community who would be 4 years old and Lamoille would be required to have them, that math doesn't work. And that's something that our region, which while it is big, is still tight. Those are the pieces, right? It's not.
Thank you for clarifying.
It's not this is bad. It's this isn't the right time.
Thank you for clarifying. And sorry, I just meant to respond to what you said earlier. Burlington has a great
Mixed delivery.
Right,
system.
I know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And certainly like any other questions. And this is a snippet of Mega My Days. So
Should we pass it over to Ms. Baker? Did you want to add?
I think that we can pass it over to her.
Does that make sense?
That works for me. Thank you,
Hey,
Becca.
Please, feel free, please stay there.
I'm just gonna move so I can not strain my neck.
Oh, okay.
Gosh, we all-
Good afternoon. I'm hoping that you have written testimony from me because I did include a number of graphs, which I can shared screen, but at least the separate handout that I'll get to near the end, it's easier to look at either on your own screen or in paper copy. So for the record, I want to say my name is Meg Baker, and I'm the Universal Pre-K Coordinator in Addison County. I work with 3 school districts: Addison Central School District, Addison Northwest, and Addison and Mount Abraham Unified School Districts. Thank you for inviting me to speak about S56. I have been the early childhood, the Universal Pre-K Coordinator for the past 8 years since the inception of Act 166 for early adopting districts. And I've been in the early childhood field in Vermont for over 20 years and have a master's in early childhood education. The focus I have in my testimony today is on the universal pre-K portions of S56, although I'm happy to also address any of the other impacts on the early childhood system. I want to begin today with thanks for your dedication to children, families, schools, and preschool programming. This system is very complex, as I think you are gathering from all of this testimony, and I appreciate your attempts both to understand it and to affect change for the children and families of Vermont. From my perspective, agreeing on the purpose of early childhood education is the first step in creating a coherent system of governance and funding. The benefits of early childhood education to young children are well documented, and the core philosophy that has guided all of my work with Universal Pre-K is that all children and families deserve access to early childhood education. All children and families should have supports in their early childhood programs for success, and that all programs and staff should be supported to deliver quality instruction. So access, supports, and quality for all children. That's what we expect from our public education systems, and we should prioritize those concepts for our youngest children as well. The other piece I'd like to call your attention to is that we need to consider the unique developmental needs of young children. Child care and early childhood education, you're separating them out, and they are inextricably linked to one another with this age group. High quality early childhood program isn't just pre-kindergarten, it's a holistic, family-centered approach that's tailored to the unique needs of this age group. Preschoolers, they straddle a developmental shift from the individually responsive, nurturing caregiving that infants and toddlers need, and the academic knowledge and greater independence that we expect from school-aged children. I want to explicitly address a few points about preschool access and supports in S56. So first, moving preschool for 4-year-olds into elementary schools, especially if you're thinking about transportation, might make it easier for some families to access preschool, but it will also create challenges for working families to access school day and school year programming without before and after school programming and summer care. It seems like it would be an easy fix to offer the after school and summer programs for younger children, but developmentally younger children need fewer transitions and consistent caregiving. So this supports the concept of sticking with a mixed delivery system for all children and families. As noted by others, current community preschool programs are likely to close if they lose most of their 4-year-olds. There was a great Planet Money episode recently called Baby's First Market Failure, and I strongly recommend it because it talks about how private programs rely on 4-year-olds to balance the costs of care. That's another reason to maintain a mixed delivery system. Becca brought up this point about access for 3-year-olds to inclusive classrooms. If you remove that age group from universal pre-K and ADM weighting, unless they have disabilities, it will reduce 3-year-old access to inclusive classrooms. A comparison that I often do is I think about school-aged children. If you had a classroom, if you had a school and it had a 2nd grade classroom and a 3rd grade classroom, there is no circumstance in which you would pull all the children who had IEPs from the 2nd grade classroom and put them in that 3rd grade classroom. The same applies in the preschool world. And there are also huge developmental shifts between 3s and 4s, perhaps even more than you would think about between 2nd and 3rd grade. So I would strongly encourage this committee to look at maintaining at least current levels of access for 3-year-olds. The next point is about CCFAP subsidies. They will serve more families based on changes to eligibility, but they won't provide universal access to early care and education the way that current funds do. Also, I'm a little concerned that families who qualify for full CCFAP as a result of income may be less likely to move their children to the public school environments because they don't have an incentive to do so, and the full day, full year programs would be more convenient for families. That means we may end up with concentrations of low-income families in those private programs instead of attending our public school programs. Inclusionary supports for preschoolers with disabilities and mental health needs are a critical need within the system. And so I'm excited about the study of special accommodations grants. These provide programs with resources to make accommodations or modifications within their programs and in their classrooms for children with disabilities. That might be extra staff, or it might be specialized equipment. But there are some complications. I was pleased to see an email this morning that made some changes to the program that perhaps will increase abilities of programs to meet the needs of children with disabilities in their private programs. And then the last point about access and supports is that in our region, we have a number of non-citizens, and non-citizen children often experience multiple barriers to accessing and succeeding in early education programs and beyond, including cost of programs, language barriers, poverty, and transportation barriers. We already have access to for non-citizen children in our public education system for K through 12, and they're very disadvantaged when they are excluded from high quality early childhood programs. So I am excited to see that this was a provision of the bill. The next pieces I wanted to bring your attention to relate to quality. Obviously, quality is the primary reason that we would want to support early childhood education. We all want what's best for young children and their families. Fortunately, we have research on brain development and best practices in quality care and education that can help to guide us. As Becca pointed out, this model is going to require a substantial number of new early childhood and early childhood licensed teachers and administrators with early childhood expertise. Although we have many folks in the early childhood world who have lots of experience, there are a lot of people who are not licensed as educators because there are not very many programs, because the paperwork and expense is onerous, and because historically there's not been any incentive to get a license. And that is a big reason. I've talked to a lot of people who say, why would I bother? I'm not going to get paid more. In order to open more preschool classrooms, and Becca covered some of this as well, school districts need time, they need administrative expertise, and they're going to need significant startup and ongoing funding, more than I see in the current bill. School districts don't have a lot of experience with the unique developmental needs of preschoolers who require more supervision and health and safety precautions than older children, more holistic learning through play and routines, and greater family communications and supports than most older children. As I note above, early childhood education is designed to support the unique needs of young children. Without denigrating anybody in the public education system, there's a substantial learning curve and investment needed for districts to fully implement high quality early childhood education programs that meet their developmental needs. So NAEYC accreditation is the gold standard for high quality developmentally appropriate education programs, but it's rigorous and it's time intensive. And right now, nobody knows how to do it in the school systems, or not very many. School startup investments, which Becca touched on, it includes really concrete facility costs, bathrooms that meet the size and abilities of young children, fencing, age-appropriate playground equipment and furniture. But it also includes cultural shifts and professional development for teachers and administrators in implementing play-based curricula, observational assessments, family engagement, embedded social services, and possibly shifting school calendar hours or year to meet the needs of working families. School districts will need time, they need administrative supports, and they will need substantial startup funding in order to implement and expand quality preschool programs. The last piece in this section is about ongoing funding for district programming. So S56 changes the weighting of the ADM preschool. So currently it's 0.46, and it would move to be 1.0, like an elementary school student. That's roughly doubling. But you're looking at taking the number of hours from 10 hours per week to a school day, which is more than double. So district programs also already cost more than community-based programs, and these children are already included in the per pupil count for their districts. So you're asking districts to do more with less ongoing funding. If we're going to increase ADM weights, we need to increase them proportionately to the number of hours so that we can reflect the higher staff ratios and the relatively high per pupil costs that a high quality preschool program demands. The Universal Pre-K programs funds have provided community programs, our private partners, with a higher hourly rate than our CCFAP subsidy funds, which is why they were initially used. Community programs would lose access to funds that currently support quality. And if we want to replace those with CCFAP funds, we need to make sure that there is an incentive for programs to maintain that quality. And we also want to make sure that those incentives are tied to inflationary pressures, the way that UPK funds currently are tied to an index, so that they don't stay level funded over time. Universal Pre-K, we've seen some real shifts in quality in our area. It really instituted some quality standards. Programs that want to partner need to meet certain quality guidelines. So they have to have a licensed teacher in early childhood education or an early childhood special education. They have to be participating in STARS at a certain level. They have to align their curriculum with the Vermont early learning standards. The very last page of this testimony is sort of a primer on this is how it looks in Addison County. And there's a bulleted list of what do public and private partner programs have to do in order to qualify. Those pieces would all disappear under your current model. And we want to sustain quality in those community partner programs. Community programs will be overseen by the CDD. This is about the governance piece, while public programs will be overseen by the Agency of Education, which leads to two separate systems of early childhood oversight. I get concerned that there may be a lack of coherence between those two systems, one run by the Child Development Division, one run by the Agency of Education. And we want to make sure that quality is well-defined in a unified way so that there's not a division over time between early care versus early education. A single system of governance for the birth to 5 population would be very helpful. One shift that I really would love to see for creating additional access and quality would be an increase in the number of hours provided by universal pre-K. Becca and I did an October 2021 survey of 30 Vermont school districts, and that demonstrated, and there's a graph, which I can share my screen, maybe. Nope, not that one. All right, can you see the graph now?
Yes.
Great. So we asked programs, in an ideal world, this is districts, in an ideal world, how much time should a high quality early childhood program offer children each week? And you can see 50% said 25 to 40 hours a week. And an additional 10% said 20 to 25% hours per week.
We have a question from Senator Weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is this responses from program managers or parents?
So this is from school district programming. So let me
Okay.
stop share. I
So
can
those
see.
that run the schools, not those that send their kids to the schools.
That's right. So it's in the school district. That's the teachers and the directors of those programs.
Okay, thank you.
And Meg, I should tell you, we have 5 minutes.
Okay, I will get through this quickly then. So let's see, increasing the access to universal preschool by creating a universal pre-K program of 20 hours a week and shifting an ADM weight to 1.0 and proportionately increasing tuition payments to community partner programs would support quality improvements and access for all children and families. And then after that, if families needed more care, CCFAP funds, subsidy funds could support access in the same programs. The last piece I want to share with you today is some information about how universal pre-K is working in our region in Addison County. So I want to emphasize that in our region, universal pre-K is working for children, families, preschool programs, and school districts. There are administrative headaches, but we have systems to make it be a seamless and accessible, supported program for children in high quality programs. About 80% of our children are enrolled in Addison County universal pre-K programs, and even more are enrolled in non-partner programs. So that's pretty rare for kids to come in with no early childhood experience to kindergarten. Almost everybody's enrolled. Access to early childhood education is linked to capacity. And this year, if you look at the graph, you can see we have about 425 children. They're enrolled in 36 total partner programs in Addison, Rutland, and Chittenden County. We have 2 home-based registered homes and 34 centers. We also have 8 school-based classrooms that are taught by 7 teachers because 1 is very part-time. But about 76% of our publicly funded preschool children are in private programs, 76%. Historically, we have had a very even split of 3-year-old and 4-year-old children that are enrolled in our public and private programs. Most of our early childhood programs have served children in mixed age classrooms for children 3 through kindergarten. And private programs are relying on preschool programming to balance the costs of infant toddler care with their preschool programming. The last data I have is that TS Gold data, which is the pie charts. This shows preschool outcomes. So universal pre-K requires programs to use Teaching Strategies Gold in order to assess preschool student knowledge and skills and across multiple developmental domains. teachers do the checkpoints, developmental checkpoints twice a year. And those expectations, the children's outcomes are scored against normed developmental continuum expectations. So if you look at the graphs, it shows developmental progress. There's fall measurements that are on the left and spring measurements that are on the right. Green is meeting norm developmental expectations. Blue is exceeding, and red is not yet meeting expectations. So in an ideal world, our red is going to shrink, right? This longitudinal data includes 3 and 4-year-olds. They're in both the schools and universal pre-K partner programs. It's about 400 to 450 children. And I'll remind you that we have 75 to 80% of our children in private settings. So the trends I want to highlight in this are TS Gold child progress data shows that high quality preschool education is making a difference to child outcomes across all domains. If you look at the data from the fall to the spring, there is consistent growth.
Senator Hewlett has a question.
Are the physical scores is that like physical education?
So physical, it includes gross motor and fine motor skills. In the early childhood world, we look at a much more holistic picture than academic. But it's some of those early writing skills as well. How does a child hold a writing implement? How do they walk? How do they balance?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. You can probably see there's a big blank space, and that's a result. We didn't do spring 2020 TS Gold checkpoints because everybody was closed. So anything before that is pre-COVID, everything after that is COVID. And we have seen some impacts to child development, especially social, emotional, cognitive, and language domains. But I'm not seeing huge dramatic changes. And then the last piece is that in our area, social, emotional, and mathematics indicators are consistently among the lowest. Children often make huge amounts of growth, but they continue to be our lowest areas. And we have offered professional development and tried to bring some of those up as well. So in conclusion, I encourage you to maintain a mixed delivery service in high quality preschool programming to promote access, support school development of high quality, developmentally appropriate preschool programming, unify early childhood oversight at a state level to remove the dual oversight and provide for greater expertise at a state level in understanding the specific needs of this age group, maintain universal pre-K access at least the current levels, increase the number of universal pre-K hours through the increased ADM weights and proportionately increase tuition payments to high quality pre-qualified community programs, support working family, non-citizen, and infant toddler access and quality by implementing the eligibility changes to CCFAP, and maintain incentives for quality improvement in all settings. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you both. Very thorough, very helpful. And I came up with a list of, as you were talking, just things that would need to be done to get to a universal pre-K. Like you said, cultural changes, what would it be like to have a pre-K in the school, playground equipment, just getting the schools up to certain standards, and that sort of leaves out the teacher shortage, which is huge, and just the construction of classrooms. So some work would certainly have to be done. It's not going to flip a switch, that's for sure. Any final questions for either of our guests? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
both.
for the opportunity to speak to you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you, Meg.
Bye.
Yeah. And I have Jay Nichols in. And they've seen Senator Hewlett's bills. Great. Is Bannon also coming?
He said he was on the way.
Some in the holder section.
Jay Nichols. How's it going?
Going okay. And at some point, I would love to testify on S66
Yes, please.
Yeah.
and 56. Both, I mean, I'm at 56, but also 66.
Do you want to come in on 50? Yeah, you mean on this section, on the pre-K section 56?
Well, we have a strong position statement at the VPA about 4-year-olds being in public schools that we've been supporting for about half a decade now. So we can give a lot of information on why we think that's a good idea at some point. If you want to
Yeah,
have that.
no, that would be great. That would be very, very helpful for us to hear that. Yeah. Yeah. Great. So I don't know if you're all speaking from one voice on Senator Gulick's draft proposal, which we reviewed yesterday, which it's I guess the best way to describe it. No. As the next step that would get us to working on our school buildings and school construction. Now, if S66 does pass, of course, we'll be building 25 to 100 more schools, but that's not included in here, is it? I think it is. I think that's the estimate.
I think consolidation is key.
So with that, who would like to go first?
I think I'm first on the list and we have not coordinated testimony. I
Okay.
haven't seen Sue since Monday and Jeff Fannin spent half the day with me yesterday working with new principals, but we haven't talked about this
Okay.
yet.
Okay, Mr. Nichols.
Okay,
Kick us
so, yeah, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, for the record. Thanks for the opportunity and allowing me to do this via Zoom as I was working with new principals all day today in South Burlington. In terms of the bill, we don't have a problem with anything that's in the bill. The only thing that I really had a problem with, Senator Gulick, is when you said the VPA had to be part of it and I had to do part of the work, but then I said, I guess that's part of my job. So, we see the need. We really are happy that the committee and the treasurer are looking towards what Rhode Island has done, because we think that might be the path forward for us, something similar to what Rhode Island has done.
Great.
We're supportive of the task force and making recommendations to Ways and Means and the education committees. And we will engage in that work fully 100% and think it's desperately needed. Our school buildings are in bad disrepair. And I just heard Senator Gulick make the comment about, not having to build more schools, but consolidating. There may have to be some tough decisions made in some places. We're at that point in Vermont. And there are some buildings that we may decide collectively that it's not worth spending the money on, that we're better off to move students or build a new school in an area that covers, 3 or 4 current schools or something along those lines. And we got to be thinking about that. So the last statement I'll say, and I said I keep my testimony to 5 minutes, it'll be less than that, is that we got to be playing the infinite game. We could be thinking about 20, 30, 40 years from now. And so that's the mindset that we need to have going into this. What we've done the last 15 or 20 years is just patchwork and catch as catch can. And so I think we need a real comprehensive approach to school construction in a way that really supports 21st century learning, safe environments for kids, and pleasant environments. All of our kids deserve to have, buildings that have good HVAC, that have, they're well heated, that are safe, have nice lighting, all those things. And I think that's where we need to go. And that's really it. I'll subject to any questions. Fully supported.
So you're good with it overall? Yes, Senator Gulick?
Yes.
Oh, my comment about consolidation was sort of supposed to be off mic, but since it was picked up into the worldwide ether, I was basically echoing what we heard from Rhode Island, which was that, they weren't necessarily able to rebuild every single building, and they did have to make some decisions around, I don't know if consolidation is the right word, but just some strategic decisions, I guess I'll say.
And I don't know, this will help us get to that point. I don't know if Act 72 will. I think Senator Gulick's bill will help us get to more strategic thinking around what building might be close to what building, and does it make sense to, leave one aside? So, yeah, okay. Mr. Glowski,
Yes.
we also need you to come back in, probably remember we were talking about the brochure you were working on for recruiting school board members?
Yes.
And we said, it'd be good to get something a little snappier.
Yeah.
Okay, so we said, I've got this ongoing list of things.
Okay.
Snappy.
I'm adding snappy to my list. Sue Siglowski, Executive Director for the Vermont School Boards Association. I was able to confer with Jeff Francis from the Superintendent's Association this morning. And both of our associations have a keen interest in school construction issue, and it's very high on our priority list. And I do have a few, we're in support of the task force, just have a few ideas for perhaps even strengthening the proposal a little bit. And I apologize, these aren't really in the order they appear in the bill, but they're pretty straightforward, I think. The first one would be to change the date for the report to January 15th, 2024, instead of February 1st. We feel like there's sort of a sense of urgency on the topic, and that 2 weeks of time in the second half of the biennium could make a difference. So
I'm sorry, what does it have now? Is it-
February 1st.
Okay.
Is that right? So February 1st?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
The second is, we wondered if it would be possible to add the president of the Vermont School Custodians and Maintenance Association, or their designee, to the task force.
Makes perfect sense.
They're an important
Great idea.
stakeholder.
Great idea.
So, and then third is, we wondered if the governor's appointee, if it could be specified that they should have expertise in construction with experience in projects of this scope and size, aligned with school facilities. Next, the governor's appointee on environmental or health
So could I
issues.
just ask about that, Governor?
Yeah.
So is there someone that would logically fit that,
I do not know of a
Okay.
specific person, but I can certainly check into that.
Okay, so there is
I
somebody that would,
checked in with Matt Musgraves on that yesterday.
okay, great.
Okay, the next one is the governor's appointee on environmental or health issues. We thought could benefit from a modifier to establish some connection to school facilities, environmental or health issues in school facilities. For the powers and duties of the task force, we suggest adding one more that specifically requires developing or outlining preliminary prioritization criteria for state and local investment in school construction funding.
So do you mind repeating that? Just,
Requiring a duty of the task force to develop or outline preliminary prioritization criteria. Sort of
okay.
what you're talking
In
about,
Act 72, but then you're saying maybe the next step with, now you're looking at the map
yes,
and seeing where there could be,
or what the criteria would be, not necessarily looking at the map, but thinking about the,
Yeah.
you know, how Rhode Island had the
Yeah.
criteria.
Right.
Almost to the end, we wondered about asking the task force to formally collect information on the school construction programs in the northeastern states, what they do. And in the statement of purpose, we thought it would make sense to more explicitly connect it to connect this draft bill to Act 72 of 2021.
put some language in there that says.
Yes.
it's continue. Yep,
Yeah.
okay.
And then lastly, for the legal assistance for the task force, we were hoping that it could, the Office of Legislative Counsel could be added to that, since this is a blended effort with the Treasurer's Office and the Agency of Education, and that there might be some attorneys in the Legislative Counsel's office that would have some expertise.
With the goal of not drafting, but just staff it to answer questions, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So sound great.
Yeah, they all do sound great.
Thank you.
Would you mind emailing that to Ledge Council, copying Hayden and sending it to you, just so when we
Yes.
see a new draft, as long as I'm not seeing any major concerns there.
No, and I do know that Rebecca Wasserman would like it.
Oh, right, Rebecca.
Today, because I think she wants to finalize it by Friday, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so email it to her.
Actually,
You wanna-
you could, yeah, if you could just send it to me, that'd be
Sure.
great, yeah. Yeah.
We'll do that.
CC, Hayden.
Hayden, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Mr. Bennett.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For the record, Jeff Bannon, Vermont EA. Good to see you again. Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to you about school buildings, state aid for construction. It's been a moratorium since 2007, and I think pretty amazing. I read the draft and I was anxious to get at it. We need to work on this. This is really important for schools, for students, for educators, for principals, superintendents,
Do you
school
know what
boards.
the last school was, Bill, by any chance?
The last
School that we had constructed in the state. Does anybody know? I mean, I think it was the middle school in Bennington, but that was.
There have been large, and this becomes an issue of equity, right? There have been some communities that were able to bond for, and during the moratorium, able to bond for school repairs, significant or
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah.
And other communities could not. There are buildings now where I think where there's an auditorium that's condemned essentially, can't be used because it's not usable. So the level of disparity is pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
And not good. And every school should be a sanctuary for students. It really should be. And so they're learning there, their learning environment are my members'
So much of their time.
working environments. You've got principals and superintendents spending time on Band-Aids, as Jay suggested, boilers breaking down that are, way past their useful life. And so my father used to say to us, we're too poor to be cheap, right? Buy good things, take care of them, and they will last you a whole lot longer.
Yeah.
And we're well beyond that point. And so I'm pleased with the draft here, want to support it. We do support it. Couple thoughts I have. I heard from Rhode Island. We met with them in the fall.
First, any concerns with what Ms. Zaglowski put forward? I suspect you're good with all of that.
I think generally, and as a general matter,
You were listening.
I was listening. I didn't, the quote she had to change or whatever. I'd like to see that in writing, but I think as a general matter, yes.
Right.
I understood Rhode Island to be, when it did its review, looked at schools that were beyond what I would call repairability. That they said there were incentives built into their whole structure. And there were some places where they said that school, I think it was 10 or 12, as I recall, that they just said, don't put another dime into it. We're spending good money after bad if you do, and we're not going to give you an incentives to do that. Again, we're too poor to be cheap.
Yeah.
And so then they said, start over, raise the building, however you want to do it, whatever, and we'll give you incentives to create a new school building. Yeah, I don't think it was consolidation that I heard. Now, maybe I heard it differently, but that's fair. I think they probably did some assessments.
And
along
given the
way.
size of that state, there must be a little bit of easier to consolidate, maybe. I don't know. In certain areas, I don't know.
What was the language?
You know that state pretty well.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
49 miles wide.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was the language that they used? I mean, it was definitely like, we knew we couldn't do, it didn't make sense for us to,
Take it down and build,
I don't know, I just got the sense there was some merging of some programs.
pulling
um,
together.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
and
fair,
some-
but
And like efficiencies
Yeah.
that they.
Right, well, that was Act 46, right? There was some school governance and and Act 46 was a bill not designed to close schools. It was designed to provide educational opportunities for students.
Mhm.
Because what we found was that schools in certain parts of the state didn't have what other students had in other parts of the states. So
How many schools closed under Act 46 or before? Any idea?
I don't know.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Don't know. And again, it wasn't about school closure.
Right,
It
right.
was about governance consolidation to hopefully provide more educational opportunities for students across the state.
Mhm.
And that's why it was done
Yeah.
and why we had incentives to do so. So we're far afield there.
But so one of your points is don't let people go toward the crummy old buildings that is gonna fall apart. Like do something to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yes, and I think that's what Rhode Island did.
Yeah.
And I think that this task force is, hopefully, I suspect that they will do their job with fidelity and look at those things, and I trust that they will.
Yeah.
Couple thoughts on that. With regard to the 11, I think it's the membership of the task force, B11, a person with expertise in environmental or public health issues appointed by the governor. I think it should be a Vermont licensed industrial hygienist. That's their job. They look at buildings, they look at exactly what they do. NEA nationally brought on some industrial hygienists at the start of the pandemic because we now understood that indoor air quality, for example, and other factors were hugely important. And there is the Association of Industrial Hygiene, American Association of Industrial Hygiene Association, I'm probably butchering it, but anyway, there is a national organization of industrial hygienists that probably should be the appointing authority, I would say, not the governor. No offense to the governor, but let's have an expert appointing somebody to this task force who knows what it is we're looking at.
Just so we know, so this is a national organization. They sort of choose somebody within the state, is that?
I think there's probably an industrial hygienist at least close
Because the
by.
only reason I asked is when we were looking at the bill yesterday, we were talking about per diems and all that kind of thing and what that might involve. That's, listen, if it gets us to the good policy, you know, we don't want to be cheap, but let's also, that was my only question about that.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not, again,
No, that goes to your point.
I'm trying to get
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah.
I think an industrial hygienist should be involved in the task force.
Yeah. Sorry.
Jeff, and I missed this, was that an add-on or a replacement?
I think a replacement of number 11.
Of 11,
I think that's the concept you're driving at with number 11.
okay.
I'm adding to.
But the governor still needs somebody, that still leaves somebody.
Well, he's got
From the
the
administration.
construction, which I think is right up his
Yeah,
alley.
yeah.
In number
It just
10
is
above.
that liaison between what happens from the governor's office on this committee and vice versa. I just want somebody there to.
Right, and there is, in number 10,
Right.
B10, you've got the governor appointing somebody with construction experience. And I support that.
Right.
I agree with VSBA and the superintendent's January 15th, I think the date was. I agree, every chomping at the bit, that's my, I think that's great. I think that is the note I have. Oh, I wonder if the appropriation at the end of the bill is enough,
What was it?
$100,000 to hire somebody appropriated to the Office of State Treasurer for the Central Fund to hire a school construction expert to assist the task force. I don't know where that number came from. I just wonder
Yeah,
if it's enough.
that was-
Yeah, salary and benefits.
Right.
Uh,
It's a
it-
preliminary number that we, to be perfectly honest, we didn't give it a ton of thought and time, so we can probably update that if needed.
I just think, taxes, you get that,
So what we usually do in these cases, Senator Hewitt, is the draft should go to joint fiscal and they should come back and tell us what it would generally go on. So that way, when we get up on the floor, somebody will say, has joint fiscal seen this, or where did the 100,000 come from? And talk to joint fiscal and they said it's about 50 or whatever.
Right.
If you could get
I don't
that.
know. I always just
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
Great.
Other than that, support it wholeheartedly and
Great.
think that it's 2000, since 2007, long overdue.
Yeah, I didn't get elected in 2000 until 2009. So I'm guessing this was all just trying to, turn off the spigot in terms of money's being spent, right? On school buildings, that's why the moratorium was put in.
2007, we had started the recession.
Yeah,
Looking back, we had started in 2007. Everybody talks about the 2008, but it really had started 2007. So I think there was increasing pressure on the fiscal, on the ed fund.
yeah.
And then you throw into it, should we be repairing buildings that are beyond their usefulness? Or if we're going to look at consolidation or other things, I think there's just, let's just stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Frankly, should have, but did not pay as close attention to it back then as I should have.
We could call Joel.
You could. I know how to read. So with that,
That's
thank
helpful.
you. Thank you for the draft and looking
Yeah.
forward.
Any
to-
final questions for any of our witnesses on this?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, So does Senator, feel like you'll take that and run with it with the Reg Council and then joint fiscal? And then we'll try to get it out of here probably, depends on what joint fiscal says to you. I'm guessing in about a week and a half.
Yeah, sounds
That'd be
good.
great.
I think it's definitely something worth prioritizing.
Yeah,
Which it seems like we're
the
doing.
just question is, when can joint fiscal turn it around? Sometimes it takes a little while. Because they're getting all the requests, so anything that costs money, and nobody knows exactly how much goes to joint fiscal for them to come up with an estimate. So,
Is it,
in that way, we'll go to Jane and we'll say, hey, this is what we're hearing.
if we are time bound, this is, and I'm new at this, so
Yeah,
please forgive my ignorance, but could we move forward with the 100K number and then ask, in the meantime, get information and then amend it on the floor?
so it's gonna go no matter what, because it has money in it.
It's gotta
It's
go.
gotta go to
fiscal.
appropriate, it has to go to appropriations.
It's gotta go to.
So could we don't have a time crunch, but we'll get 5 or 6 bills out by March 17th. I mean, that's a lot. Usually we are out, remember, crossover is usually like the 7th of March, 8th of March. We have in legislative time, a lot of time.
Okay. In my
Yeah.
world, that's a short time.
Yeah.
That's a month.
Yeah. So. Because we're getting, as you'll see, next week's agenda is tighter and tighter and tighter in terms of what we can take it out. So things should leave here by around town meeting week. Great. You good?
Gotta wait till S5 passes and fails too, because I don't know how we're gonna heat it.
Right, all right.
Which one's S5?
That's,
S5.
Oh, right, the one I've gotten 200.
yeah,
emails.
200
Right.
emails.
How could I forget?
Yeah. And a bunch of, it's kept the pages, oriented the pages to who we all are, that's for sure. I mean, the difference between the pages that had really very little to do and now this, Okay, we're finished for the day. Unless, Senator Kulik, did you want to have something on record?
Well, yeah, sure. Since we have VSBA and Vermont NEA, yeah, I was getting there. Here, I just would like to sort of reiterate that we'd love to hear testimony around Act 56. Because the pre-K piece.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Not today.
No, not today.
Yeah. Anything else?